for everybody who is able to see the keynote to raise their hand. That is no one. I was not able to see the keynote. I don't know. I looks like we had one person out here was able to see it. I actually tried to watch it several times, and for some reason it never loaded for me. And I don't know if that was just me. If somebody tried to watch it live, this is what I see when I try to go to it. I just see presentation ended, and this is. Yeah. I joined it. I thought like right when it started, and it wouldn't let me join. So I don't know what the issue was. I guess several people in here were able to see it. So. You did better than us on the panel. So I don't know that we'll have a whole lot of interesting things to say about the keynotes. Any comments on the keynotes from you, gentlemen?
I heard that and the one that I'm most looking forward to catching up with is the Hannah Foxwell one. I thought that all the stuff I saw about the way building platform games from all the highlights looked really interesting. So I'm looking forward to catching up with that one. I know that they'll have the on-demand talks for the keynote sometime soon. I just really want to see that.
Yeah.
And I think Holly Collins as well. I think her keynote's meant to have done really, really well because there was a whole load of stuff in the Slack channels. Everyone was going on about it and saying about climate change getting mentioned. So that's always really cool to see stuff just all about the conference.
Yeah, so I wasn't able to get in, and I can actually watch the recording afterwards either. So I just went and read the release notes of 1.19, and am excited about a lot of the stuff that's popping up there. Since I'm from NetApp, I'm curious about things like the storage capacity tracking, ephemeral inline volumes, and so I kind of just try to do a project update on my own, or just reading all the release notes of everything. And so I thought that's kind of cool. But yeah, I had issues with the platform too.
Yeah, and actually, we should probably just start on talking about what's new in Kubernetes. Would we say 1.9 or 19?
1.19, 1.19, 1.19.
1.19. It's 1.19, right? Yeah.
So I believe it's 1.19.
Sysdig did I think a pretty good write-up going through and talking about some of these changes. So yeah, we can kind of start on these, and you guys had a few changes that you were particularly excited about.
So for me, it was the tracking the work around pod spreading and how to even basically pod spreading policies, things like that, is very interesting. I think in this release, again, the storage items for me are interesting. Ephemeral inline volumes. Interesting. I need to read more on the storage capacity tracking, but I found that interesting as well. But that was that's me. Yeah.
What was the storage thing? I guess there's something new for PVC cloning, is what Waleed is saying in the chat. Is that right?
There's there's cloning in the clone is an object in Kubernetes already. I can't remember where it's at in the. I think it might be in beta at this point. Is that what you're talking about, Waleed? Yeah.
Get him in here to talk about it.
Yeah. So for that, to leverage that, I think your CSI plugin is going to have to support clone, which depending on who I would assume, Jay, that does the AKS CSI release? Do you know if that supports the clone?
Let me take a look. We just put out a release about what came in it. Give me one moment. The CSI driver support. Sure. Let me go to the learn more area.
Within the storage realm, I'm also interested in the storage pooling. That's interesting. Clone snapshots. Snapshot for me inside of Kubernetes is a bit weird, and how cloud providers approach the concept of snapshot is actually incorrect. But Amazon defines snapshot for the cloud at this point.
Yeah, and it seems like the focus on storage, I think people still feel like Kubernetes isn't quite the thing for stateful applications, or at least there are a lot of challenges there. So it seems like there's a lot of attention being brought to the storage area. I know that there are also sort of a cottage industry built up around this. I did some work with Portworx, I want to say it's almost 2 years ago now, where we would do, we were building pipelines that could basically do snapshots of what was in production for purposes of testing. And it was always, it was like a copy on write kind of snapshot change and refill, so it could happen in seconds. It was really cool. But I guess some of this functionality is coming into the actual core API, right?
Well, you're gonna have like a data plane, right? So you can have someone like say OpenEBS, that's a data plane. There was a good talk today on VTES, a CNCF project for in-cluster storage, and so that's for people who are interested in that. I would encourage going and watching that talk. VTES is a great. I think it's Sandbox right now, or it's either incubation or Sandbox, but that's a great little project as well. But the talk today highlights that project, and I would recommend people to go look at that. But yeah, state in Kubernetes is highly debated at this moment in time. And I think when we talk about data in Kubernetes, when we're talking about storage, are we really talking about storage? Are we talking about apps, applications that make use of storage? So are we talking about databases inside of Kubernetes, things like that? And when I start thinking about that, I'm starting to think that we're probably trying to solve those problems higher up in the stack. So let's solve, data problems inside Kafka, for example. Let's solve data problems in Cassandra versus trying to solve that down at the metal or within Kubernetes itself. Fine to solve that at the data plane, though, I think.
Yeah, I've embarked on an interesting way of testing storage issues. I built a Kubernetes cluster out of Atomic Pies. I don't know if you're familiar with the Atomic Pi. At some point, I'm going to give a talk on it. But and then I have a NFS connected to it to provide storage for stateful applications. And then the way that I test it is every once in a while, my kids walk by and bump the cable and it disconnects the storage. And this has taught me a lot about storage resilience in Kubernetes clusters. Anyway,
so one of the things I wanted to actually bring up, and because you have the generic ephemeral inline volumes, and when you think about storage and speed, having ephemeral disk is really kind of useful in the cloud. We talk about how the idea that these applications we build are on systems that are temporary. So build disks that are temporary for workloads, and look to offload some of those stateful things that you need to do into databases. But always there could be a need for massive amount of storage, and so having ephemeral drives are really big. I know one of the big things that AKS added as part of this week's big announcements were some storage extensions to the product, and one of them is ephemeral disks for clusters, which I think is really useful. So all the nodes will come with ephemeral drives that you can go ahead and mount use. And then the other thing I thought was really interesting is they added in Azure files and Azure disks for persistent storage for your clusters. And I think that brings up this whole idea that maybe, Matt, you could talk a little bit more about like network storage across clusters, and the fact that like this is something that they've provided now within AKS, which is probably useful for companies that have tons and tons of objects. And I'm curious if you've seen these types of things yourself, these additions of networked file systems for Kubernetes.
So from our side, yes, definitely we're seeing usage of. For those who don't know NetApp, NetApp's kind of crown was won through inventing a very, very fast NFS effectively, and so we do see a lot of workload. Some of that workload is going to be things like machine learning workload, where you can have job data that's shared across nodes. And then we're seeing users make use of highly performant NFS at Azure with our Azure NetApp Files product, which is effectively just managed ONTAP. So we manage the ONTAP for you, and then we expose NFS or ONTAP effectively to the user via API, and then we have a CSI plugin that can sit there and talk to our NFS. But we're seeing a lot of usage now, so that's ramping up quite a bit. Prior to that, though, I was seeing a lot more block inside of Kubernetes. Object, is always a question for us, because it's for as a company, because we don't have object in the cloud right now, but we do have on. So we focus with on-premise object, and so things like Spark workload would make use of object storage inside of Kubernetes. And so you'll see, we have products that address each of those kind of columns effectively.
It did seem like one of the things from 119 that I took out of it, with a couple of things, but on that, Kubernetes does seem to have kind of grown up an awful lot recently, and then certainly a lot more accommodating about different things, and a lot more willing to say, well, look, these are all the different workloads that are there. Yeah, they might require different classes of storage. We might need to look at how to group those, and then seeing, Microsoft coming in, obviously NetApp knowing everything about that, but all of these types of things all coming along. And then in 119, one of the big ones for me, very, very boring for everybody, but was of course the support window increase. That's just another one of those things that says, this is something that's here to stay. So it felt like it was growing up, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and the treatment of the beta APIs. I recently went through and stripped out all my beta API YAMLs that I had sitting there for 3 years. And we're like, oh, these have been stable for 5 versions. What the heck is this? So it was some cleanup that I had to do there. Yeah, and then going back to this ephemeral volume thing, I'm curious. I need to dig into it a little bit more, but I know for us at CodeFresh, one of the things that our secret sauce, that we've always done has been to mount the local volume that's on the node onto all of our build containers, and it's one of the things that makes the builds happen so quickly. So I'm interested to see if this actually makes it a little bit easier, because when we're installing this on people's clusters, we have to do a little bit more thinking through storage and classes and stuff like that. So interesting to see what happens with that. And of course,
I think all the work I think
yeah, go ahead.
Pretty good too. There's a lot of work still being done in KubeADM, and I think we need to keep highlighting that there's still a need for people to contribute into KubeADM and help keep moving that towards the finish line.
One other thing that this whole discussion of Kubernetes growing up, you're starting to see more and more advancements for Windows. And I'm not a Windows person by any stretch of the imagination.
Says the Microsoft guy.
We're I'm going to be honest with you.
We know you've got a Windows machine back there somewhere.
Actually, I do. I've got one. And it's intentional, because I want to know how everything works on every different types of, development environment. But just specifically Windows containers, even getting IPv6 support, it's a minor thing. But there's little things that can say Windows containers can be part of a enterprise solution to deploy applications, and you've really got to go that direction. I'm a Linux person. I'm so used to deploying Linux-based applications, but I also know that Windows licensing is a thing. It is very much a thing. And so I like the idea of containers handling, Waleed saying, legacy. It's just one of those really great opportunities to bring legacy into containers and use Windows as a first class option.
Yeah, I actually was pretty bullish on the migration of Windows to containers until I used it and saw that I had to always have my containers match the kernel version of the host. And then all of a sudden I was making sure that all my tooling always had the right version of the kernel, because that's a limitation that doesn't exist in Linux and is actually really painful. So I don't know. What were the improvements around Windows that you saw? I didn't see those.
I just saw some that Containerd and of course some changes to networking. But
so Containerd supports Windows now.
It's stable now at this point.
Okay, and it was beta before. Got it.
Is it beta or stable? Lead was it? I thought it was stable now. Beta.
Oh, it's still beta. Okay. Interesting. Well, I would be hopeful that happens. I mean, I hope that Windows containers, Windows Kubernetes. I know that there are a lot of people that use those workloads today, even though it is still considered beta in most platforms. I know a lot of people that have moved their legacy over, but it does require some what feels like special handholding from my point of view.
I know, in the early days, there was there's always been concern and a lot of work around networking and figuring out all the networking not issues, but just differences in how Windows does networking versus how Linux would do networking, and getting all that to work correctly for kubelet and Kubernetes. And it's nice to see that one, it does speak towards the difficulty of networking, I guess, that they're still working on it, but it's nice to see that it's coming close to the finish line as well.
And the cloud providers, for the most part, are taking a big bite of it and putting, hard hours into it. I can speak to at least what I've seen from, the Azure side. There's big time being put into making Windows another first-class citizen in the world of Kubernetes. And I think it's just important because there's still so much legacy enterprise that wants to just find ways to do things simpler.
Yeah, and I certainly see that when speaking to customers, is that they are wanting to, whether it's because it's legacy or whether it's because these are, it's a known platform, it's kind of a trusted source, and then going, okay, well, we want to have that in the land of Kubernetes. And absolutely, I see a lot of people who are not just looking for it and going, oh, will Windows support that, but actually actively wanting that support. So it's really exciting. I think there's so much going on. I think we talked about it. I don't think it was when we were recording it, but we talked about the whole ecosystem and how would you know everything that's going on in Kubernetes? And I think it's really exciting, right? I mean, even just I always class myself as a Linux guy, just like Jay's saying, and it's just that whole thing of there's so much going on and there's so much movement, and it's really good and healthy.
Yeah, I felt last year at Kubecon like I had a really good handle on the ecosystem, and this year I feel like every time I turn around, I'm like, wait, what's this? What's that thing? Oh, wait, what's going on over here? And it does, the sprawl has definitely expanded. I don't know if anybody has a total
stuff that went incubating. That was amazing. I was like that. Oh, and this has gone incubating. This is now incubating. This is incubating. It was like, wow, that's a lot. And I've not dived into them because some of them I was like, oh, that's cool, but it's it's sandbox. I don't need to worry about it too much. But no, there's so much that's going.
I'm betting money that in a few years, as all the Windows items start to move through towards stable, that we'll be having panels like this discussing that the rapid increase of .NET developers shipping into Kubernetes, because Microsoft is a developer company. They built their entire empire on developers, and a great ecosystem.
Ballmer said it, developers, right?
Yep. And as soon as from Visual Studio, I can sit at my desk, go through a CI/CD process, and then get it out and running inside of an AKS cluster on top of a Windows node, or where I don't even know I'm on a Windows node. I'm just running my pod, my .NET app inside of a pod that's being all managed for me by Microsoft. We're actually gonna, I bet we'll see more workload on Kubernetes on Windows in 5 years than we'll see Linux workload.
Do you think it's ubiquitous knowledge that you can have clusters with Windows and Linux and ARM all in the one cluster? Does everybody know that, or is that still kind of permeating?
I mean, everyone knows that.
Yeah, node pools at the least. I can say for this, we've put a bunch of time into letting people know node pools are really useful and important, and can allow you to diversify what you're running in your clusters on your nodes. And I think that was really, if you look at the node pooling in AKS, I think it's really interesting, and especially the idea of moving different types of processors for different workloads within the same cluster. I think that was one of the really cool things that I noticed when playing around with those. So I can have GPU nodes for your, say, data intensive work. Within the same cluster, you can go ahead and have some for a web app. I thought that was just one using regular, x64 or x86, whatever you want to call it. The point is, I think that the ability to run complex workloads with different types of gear backing it is one of the things we're seeing also improving. And not only that, but the security of that gear with say confidential computing program built into something like Azure Kubernetes service based on the huge adoption of SGX chips. So I think that these are we keep saying it, Kubernetes is just growing up.
Well, yeah, and then SecComp I think went to GA, went stable in 1.19 as well. But then you're seeing things in the release that where you should have gone, yeah, why did we not have that in pre 1.0, like standard formatting for all logs in Kubernetes? I mean, really, 1.19 is when we think about that.
Is
Stuff
logging
like
really that important, Matt? Come on.
Yeah, sometimes my engineers tell me that at times. That and documentation, right? Is documentation that important?
Yeah. Well, I think this is definitely good discussion on Kubernetes 1.19. Again, keep the discussion in the chat going, and feel free to throw questions in the Q&A. I wanted to move on to another topic, which is GitOps operator, and kind of a little bit of a division that has opened up. I don't know if either of you have followed Argo CD and the split in Flux. So for those that don't know, and if I butcher this, feel free to correct in the chat, but Flux, which is a project out of Weaveworks, and Weaveworks was kind of big on GitOps, and they might have even been the one to coin the term. They based Flux on Argo CD in the beginning and have pulled out now. And I think they just mentioned it a few days ago that they are now going to be splitting completely from Argo CD and creating kind of their own standard. They're not going to have a compatibility layer with it. So I'm curious if there are any thoughts on that transition out that's happening, and what that means for CD operators in general, or is this the beginning of another set of wars? This is the next frontier for battle.
I think I think they misunderstand that they're in a battle. I think it was a bad decision to walk. This will only work if they all can work together. All these projects can work together. Between the two companies, when you start to look at companies and their sizes and how they can rally people into projects, I feel that Flux made some bad decisions here. And Argo, for me, is dominantly superior to Flux in a lot of different things. It's got if you look at it, it's managed as a product, versus a project. They call it Project Argo, but it's being managed. They have a PM. They're managing it as if it's a product. And so you're seeing good customer stories coming out of it. And if you look at the customer adoption on the Argo site versus the Flux site, you're seeing more enterprise grade customers starting to use Argo CD. And then Argo's got all the other components as well than just CD. And then Flux doesn't have all those things. That's my position.
That kind of there's a thing that I thought we were talking about, we may talk about at some point, and it makes me think of why people make choices when it comes to CI/CD in general. Like, what is the first thing that you need to really consider for your team, aside from like compatibility with the stuff you're going to work with, the ease of use? But I think it's just like integration into things that you understand and the people who are going to continue to build it, and build it as, like you said, a product with a long-term vision and a goal for developers and people who are going to be building it. And I think that Argo CD has had that and continues to have that, and will have the structure to ensure that the program, the project grows. And for projects like Tenzu, you see just huge adoption as well, like for the two. I met, what's his name, Alex, I believe, from Weaveworks, online a few years ago, and read a bunch of his stuff around GitOps, and I still think that his general ideas are spot on. How the kind of civil war, if you will, if this kind of is, I don't know, works out, I guess it's just all based on business. Hands down, I think that you have to protect your business.
That's a good point. It reminds me a bit of the battle when Docker was like, "Hey, we're gonna build our whole revenue model on this thing called Docker Swarm, and that'll be the way to run containers at scale." And that turned out to be the thing that Google was going to give away for free. And so building their business model on that was not going to work well. And just to clarify from the chat, some people were pointing out that Weaveworks had announced that they would be collaborating with Argo Flux. And of course that's over. That's the news, is that that's not happening anymore, and that they are forking out to do their own project.
I think the Red Hat news, likely if I had to guess, the groups somewhat probably knew about the Red Hat news was going to come down the pipe and be public here at some point. From business perspective, that probably wasn't going to be good, and that could be the reason for the split. I agree. I think this is a business. This is going to be a business decision, and but pulling it up to a macro pattern. If we look at Docker, what did Docker do? What they failed to do is they failed to embrace a community, and they tried to protect their empire and go it alone. And
it's that control a lot of the time. Just to chime in to agree with you strongly. I mean, it's that control and the perceived loss of control by having something that's community driven. And I'm agreeing with you there.
Yeah, it's if you want to do a movement, you don't want to control it. You want to be if you're the first person in the movement, you need to get others to come alongside you. You don't want to have the attention. And I feel that I think Argo is probably going to succeed on this because they're continuing to embrace the global community versus now we're on our own path today.
It all makes me think about some of the open source database builders who don't really take contributions, but they call themselves open source, and we've seen that a little. And I just always think about how in the end you're kind of just protecting your IP in a way and trying to protect what your long-term future looks like, and that could be kind of related to that. The decision is that I know that it's a tough market to be able to be a part of someone's CI/CD. There's so many options, and then GitOps is a subsect of that. You have to really think about, like I said, integration into tools that you have, and then long-term support from a community. And I just think like Argo's set up a little bit better right now.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I hope it's not indicative of things to come. For what it's worth, I think Argo kind of started the party, and so I really appreciate them for that, and think that there's a lot. We actually did a cool talk with the CNCF just a few weeks ago on CodeFresh plus Argo, and we've noticed a lot of our users have glommed onto it and had a lot of success and been very happy with it. So definitely rooting for that project and looking to get a lot more involved myself, and some cool stuff happening there.
There's also, I mean, Argo is playing in multiple foundations too, because they're part of the continuous delivery foundation.
Argo?
From what I understand.
No, they're only in the CNCF.
Is it,
or at least they're not publicly listed in the CD Foundation.
I do believe they've just gone incubating as well, haven't they? That was announced.
Yeah, they're incubating in CNCF, and if you look in the CD Foundation projects, I'll pull it up here. They're not listed, which is a strange thing. I'm not sure that I totally understand why that is.
Foundations.
I would say you had it so nobody was listed.
Oh, yeah, now it's like not working. Or if there's some change happening, what's going on here? Projects. Oh, now it redirects to a blank page on the Linux Foundation. I don't know why that is. I looked at it just the other day and they're not on there, so I don't know what the deal is. But well, anyway, we'll move on to safer waters rather than trying to engage in conversation about what's going on with service meshes, which is going to scare everybody off. So let's talk about favorite talks of the day, and I'll start off on that one. I watched a talk by Ellen Corbis on optimizing the developer experience, and I thought it was really interesting. They talked about kind of how there are the thing of a lot of people poo-poo on local clusters and say that you should always be using cloud. Some people say cloud is too expensive, you should use local clusters. And I think she spent a lot of time focusing on, well, how do you create the best developer experience for the scale that you're at and kind of pick the right tool for the job. And so I thought that was a great talk and would recommend it. I'm hoping that we'll have them on the show tomorrow and have Ellen on to discuss her talk, discuss their talk a little bit. Sorry, misgendering. To discuss their talk a little bit. So we'll see if we can get that done. And Matt, you were saying that you actually have a whole track that is your favorite talk.
Yeah, I follow the ML track at this point, and that's just professional things I'm working on right now. But it's also very interesting. One thing I would like is to see an expansion of that track, because I think only today there was only 4 presentations on that in that specific track. The one for me that was a favorite, I'm just pulling it up, was the production multi-node jobs with gang scheduling, K8s, GPUs, and RDMA. That was interesting. And so, some transparent here, I just watch these all after the fact usually, and then I try to watch them at 2x. And then the other one is there a place for distributed storage for AI ML on Kubernetes? But I usually tend to try to follow the ML tracks right now. Scale is cool too. I know Jay follows some interesting one as well. I wish I could follow all of them.
The one that I'm looking forward to watching that I haven't seen yet. I want to watch Stress and Mental Health in Technology by Jenny Kullian. I think that's a really interesting one I'd like to check out. I haven't had an opportunity to see these, and I'm waiting basically for the on-demands. That one is a really interesting one for me. And then I think the one like scaling telepresence, I think that is another interesting one because I love the idea of how remote work and creating these more immersive development and engineering environments for people it is really helpful with the increase in remote work right now.
And echoing something that's in the chat there, I mean, the one that obviously really amused me because of the title was the Andy Martin's talk, which I'm going to look at notes while I read it out. In a container, nobody hears your screams. Next generation process isolation. It was the thing that I liked about it was quite. So I like the security side of things, and that's really what gets me going. And this one, you're talking about some pretty dry subject matter, and it could be quite dull and the wrong. And there's a lot of different options. And a lot of the time in talks like this, it's very easy for the person who's talking to then go in and say, right, so you should be definitely doing X, Y, and Z, and it makes everything really secure. And you look at it and you go, or I could just switch it all off because it's going to be as usable for me if I do that, and it's all just too complicated and difficult. And he did a really good point of going through all these different ways of doing things, and then at the end said, look, here's what you need to go through and decide if it's right for you, which I found really refreshing. But to be honest, like everybody said, I want to watch some of the other ones. There's so many that were on, and they are great for watching after over the 2 weeks. But if I had to pick one, that would probably be my one. And title's a big part of it.
I like something that you said prior when we started our call, actually, which is that you're able to attend more of these than you would have prior if this was actually a physical event. And I would agree with you on that.
Yeah, and so I would always, we talked as well before. I come from a vendor, obviously, so as part of being getting to come along and getting, especially when it was in the US and I'd get flown over from Scotland, part of the deal is they'd make me work. And so one of the things is standing at booths. So we talked before about having to stand on booths. And sometimes nobody likes standing there for hours and hours, but the conversations you have with people are the really cool parts. So you would then speak to everyone and do what we're doing. And someone would say, how are you finding the conference? And someone would go, oh, you should watch blah. And it would be something, I mean, you're talking about ML there, Matt, but I mean, that would be something that I wouldn't be naturally drawn towards to watch. You would speak to someone, you'd feel their enthusiasm, and you do that. But yeah, definitely been to a lot more, because typically after you've been working, I like to kick back and have a beer. So typically at the conference, I would then go and have a beer rather than go and watch some more. But hey, that's been me.
I do miss hallway tracks. I'm not gonna lie. And while I do really appreciate these opportunities to talk with you and have conversations with the people who are in the chat, there is a lot to be said about the things that can be accomplished in hallway tracks, and it's not just going to grab a beer later. It's those conversations about real problems that people deal with that they don't get a chance to say in front of group of 1,000 or 2,000 people.
Yeah,
And I think,
sorry, go ahead.
no, I was saying that's a huge loss, I think, for us right now. But we can make up for it in ways by trying to have meaningful conversations online, using Slack and trying to have some meaningful conversations, and just also trying to be helpful to one another. And I think that's really the thing that I've noticed. Well, like I would rather be chilling with my friends, seeing y'all having that, like we should be doing this, together, having a drink together. But these are the situations we've been kind of handed, and I think that it's really cool that we can do something like this and still kind of have that little hallway and hear from people. And the one thing I was curious if there are people who are like in our chat and they want to share what they felt about like being able to talk with people on Slack and things like this. I'd be curious what people's experience have been like.
Yeah, I'll tack onto that as well. Keeping an eye on the chat in case something comes through. But it was a lot easier in person to go over and say, forget about that. I don't care about the vendor stuff that I'm doing. What I'm actually interested in what's going on. And it's very difficult, I find, to do that on chat because then it's very much a, wait a minute, who are you? Why are you talking to me? And you go, it sounds so false on text going, hey, I work for these people, but I just want to talk.
Yeah. Do you wish that they did the Second Life setup, or we did this all in Roblox?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of show my age, but maybe some sort of lawnmower man setup would be. Yeah,
lawnmower man. Yeah. Well, and actually,
sorry, I'll answer your question. That I don't know what would work. I'm kind of. It's a little exciting. It's the same as kind of having a Zoom session where you want to, you have a chat with friends. You miss out on being able to just have a small conversation with someone, a sideline thing. It's going to happen. Someone's going to come up with a genius way of doing it at this time. But yeah, something missing there. Yeah.
There's 6 stealth companies right now with VC funding solving this problem.
Oh, I hope so. Yeah, and there are actually also some topics I haven't seen any hardcore discussion on that I actually think are really big deals, and maybe this banking one that I don't know if it was Waleed or Bhuvanesh that recommended it. Maybe that might answer the questions. But one of the things I've noticed is a particular challenge is just resource management in Kubernetes, and kind of in the old days, I think people just sort of they're like, well, I just get a VM and I size for my VM, there you go. And you ended up with a lot of idle time. And this is kind of, I think, part of, now, again, none of us got to see the keynote, but I think this is part of the mention about climate change and just energy usage was like, oh, containers let us pack things more efficiently. We use less resources. This is more efficient. It costs less money. It's good for the environment. Win, win, win all around. But something I've noticed in some of the clusters that I'm managing is I have processes that spike in their usage, and that I haven't figured out a good way to be like, oh, like I don't want to size this for what it can use because I end up losing space. I want to size it for what it does use. So maybe I should split it out into a new service that then will deploy a new pod, but that introduces a latency overhead that I'm not sure that I want. So I feel like maybe resource management across nodes is something that I would like to see some more discussion or talks on. And I say all that as kind of a preamble, since you were all talking about your favorite talks. Are there talks that you feel like are missing? Maybe topics that you wish were covered more deeply?
I'd like to see more around. I know in this release there was some work done on, I'm trying to remember it correctly, where when a pod is scheduled to a worker node, if that pod needs storage, that there's now a check to ensure that there's a sufficient amount of resources to service that pod on the storage side. And so I think I'd like to start to see talks around that. I feel like we're still, that maybe some of that's going to come in from vendors, likely as additional components that they ship on top of Kubernetes to make resource management more effective in KS. I think there will be a line there at some point. But that, yeah, that's what I would like to see, is that specifically that, because I was interested in knowing more about that topic.
Yeah. What about you, Jay?
I need more info on auto scaling nodes, honestly. I know cloud vendors have made it a lot simpler in the context, but I need to learn more about it, and I'd love to see more around individual node expansion based on how much traffic you have, things like that. So that's a thing that I'm gonna want to see more of in the future. That, and I'd love to see a more. I'd love to see a little bit more about dev tool integrations. And like I said, I think stuff like Tilt to me is really awesome.
Yeah, that was
I think
Ellen's
they have
talk
a-
was on Tilt, which was cool.
yeah, I really love tools that help people uh, just work easier. And so I'd love to see more tooling talks about developer and engineer simplicity. More and more of that, I think, is really helpful. We can get into the nitty gritty and the deep parts of Kubernetes, but I think that a lot of the cloud providers are making it simpler and simpler for you to just build a cluster. So how you work with that cluster afterwards, I think, is really interesting to me.
Ashley?
It was too new to really come in, but probably some open service mesh stuff I'd be really interested in seeing some more of. I actually ended up, it was Microsoft. It was Microsoft's booth that I went by, and they had some stuff on open service mesh. That would be really interesting. And service mesh interface as well is also quite exciting new, but there is some stuff around that. But yeah, open service mesh, just because to me it's, well, I think it was last KubeCon EU. It was the phrase that everyone was banding around with service mesh, service mesh, service mesh, service mesh. And so of course then having the open service mesh, I'd really like to learn a little bit more, dive further into that. And I think that's going to be something that we will see more of. So it's not that it was missing, it was just something I expected to see a little bit more of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, and to connect the dots between you and Jay's comments, like a lot of talks have been done around service to mesh to say, hey, look what we could do. And maybe there needs to be more conversation about here's how to actually like do this in a way that is friendly to your engineering time, is easy to onboard to. One of the tricky things here is that a lot of the best practices for the right way to do things is counter to the easy way to do things. So for example, the cloud providers make it really easy for you to create a cluster through their UIs and to get started and things like that. But once you're in production, like you basically should never, ever do that. you should have that all happening through code and happening through automated systems that are checking everything and getting the scale exactly right. The idea of managing like a prod cluster in a UI on the cloud is like, it's like a very bad pattern. But in order for you to even get there, you probably have to go through a stage where you're doing it, through ClickOps kind of thing. Well, cool. So let's see the next. One of the things that Vajra mentioned in the chat was that he was interested to see more proactive event monitoring and resiliency in Kubernetes environments. And resiliency, actually, I'll echo that one because I've been doing a lot of work with spot instances or preemptible nodes on Google. Azure has a different name for them, and I can't remember what it is. But these basically, the idea is you have these nodes that can be destroyed at any time. And so you pay very, very little comparatively for them. So they're perfect for dev clusters. They're perfect for workloads where you can actually restart things. And so we've been doing, with CodeFresh, I've been doing a little bit of work of throwing the CodeFresh runner onto Kubernetes clusters with preemptible nodes with auto scaling. So you can throw 10,000 jobs on it and it just dumps a bunch of nodes onto it, and they're all preemptible. So they're super cheap and they can get destroyed and like it'll automatically restart the workload. So that's like, that feels very cool. And it feels especially cool when you see the difference in your bill because it's about 1/10 of the price of a full node. So
we have
I mean, we do spot-based instances and things like that. You can request them. I think that ensuring that you'll be able to do the work you want to do at a reasonable cost makes sense as well.
Yeah, I mean, so just a quick plug, we actually do have an autoscaler that lives inside of it's a controller that basically lives inside of a Kubernetes cluster that's running on top of the spot instances at the marketplace place at Google, Amazon, or Azure, and the controller effectively emits telemetry up into a decision system that decides to scale up or scale down based upon fluctuations in the market. It also is doing there was a question about predictive, and so it's also doing predictive where it knows that it's picked up on the fact that Amazon or whomever has said your instance is about to go away. You have 2 minutes to get the hell off this instance. And so it deals with
God,
that.
I remember those days. Sorry to interrupt, but God, I remember those days.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And so it automatically will adjust the cluster to optimize the cluster's size and resources to the workload running on it at that moment in time. And so that's I'm touching on some of the work I'm doing right now.
Well, I want to move on to a few other news items as we were in the last 10 minutes here. One of the pieces of news that I noticed coming out just ahead of the conference is that, and there was some discussion in one of the talks, Contour, which is a kind of interesting application, has just gone into incubation with the CNCF. And essentially it's I guess it's basically a reverse proxy that uses Envoy. And I haven't used it yet. So I'm curious if any of you have had experience with Contour, and this is kind of interesting to see this come into the incubation.
So this is a
Not yet myself.
And I remember the original thrust behind this project was to manage migrations from OpenStack into Kubernetes and to route all that service traffic. That was the goal of this project. And I think it was Yahoo Japan was the first one to use this, if I remember my history, but I'm old. I get spotty now.
Interesting.
So I've used it like a long time ago. I've not used it lately, but I'm eager to. I like seeing this project come into the sandbox. I'm more interested in seeing, will VMware move Valero into a sandbox or not? Valero being Heptio's Heptio Arc, which was the backup recovery project for Kubernetes.
Interesting.
But this has a lot of promise. This is a really cool thing. I would recommend anyone to go look at this. The original stuff when it first shipped was really awesome, and I would, given it's the Heptio team, it's going to go really far. It's going to be really awesome.
Yeah, and I've actually felt the need for more robust ingress controllers than just what is offered through either configuring your own through Envoy. Solo.io has a really interesting project with Glue that is pretty cool, and I've been interested in. And then also, most people, of course, just took what they were doing, which was maybe using an Nginx reverse proxy and just dump that into Kubernetes. And it turns out, I think Envoy is better at it. And there are some better tools. So I'm interested to try out Contour and see how it goes. Could be really cool.
Also, and I've not used it at all, so I'll call it out right away, but certainly I believe the idea of being able to delegate access for creating those ingress controllers is a big thing. But I might be thinking of a different project. No, I'm pretty sure it's that. Yeah,
and we actually do have a question, which maybe we'll take this as a group. It's a pretty broad one. Which tools in CNCF Kubernetes ecosystems are rock solid, mature, and stable, like MySQL? And I guess that's anything in the graduated channel. What do you think?
Mongo's been pretty damn solid for what I've seen, but that's based on your like of MongoDB.
I'm a very risk preferred, so a lot of this stuff I would just put into production just to see what happens. But if your job's on the line, then that's a little different story. I would say things like Linkerd is really damn solid and ready for production. Kubernetes, of course. I think anything like Dan, like you said, anything that's in the graduated channels is ready. But
do you think it's funny that etcd is incubating still, even though it's everywhere?
On that.
I think I would approach it the other way around. I would say that it's very easy to go off and look at all these wonderful things that are there. And I know that we want to have a plan for what production is going to look like in the future and the problems we're going to hit. But initially, I wouldn't go looking at what's rock solid and how can I use it. I would try and translate that back to, even if it's just you mucking around. Well, if it's just you mucking around, maybe it's a little bit different, but try and look at what is the needs that you need this for, because it's all very well me saying, wow, stick Kubernetes on there, do this, do that, do next, and then actually you're coming back and going, or I could have just gone serverless. I don't know why you told me to go and look at Kubernetes. You know, so I would say, what is it you're wanting to do? And if it's to learn and to do stuff, probably if it's to be involved in the community, go and look at the sandbox stuff, man. You can get right in around there. The community will be open and welcoming. Not that they aren't in graduated projects, but you don't have any of the politics then. Whereas if it's, oh no, I want to build out a platform, then what does your platform need? And then go from there. And although, as everybody said, if you are in that situation, you go, no, I do want to look at all this, then work from graduated down is probably a good idea.
Well, and for those that don't know, the graduation criteria for a CNCF project, it is documented in GitHub, and essentially you have to pass an independent security audit, and then you also have to get a bunch of people from the TOC to approve it as a graduated project. And what they consider it as is like crossing the chasm. Once something is mainstream, then it can be graduated. So something might be technically rock solid, but it doesn't have the adoption level, or maybe the audit hasn't been completed, so it wouldn't be considered graduated. There are a ton of, most of the stuff in, I think it goes sandbox, incubating, graduated, right? And so anything that's in incubating has like some fair usage that you should be able to look to real life use cases.
I think we want to be careful when we say things are ready for production. What we may not be able to say is it's ready for the business, because the business is going to have, like Ashley's saying, is that the business is going to have a lot of other stories that it's going to need to be able to tell. The classic one that you pull out as a bullet point for every single deck you do is audit and access control for enterprises. You know, enterprise is going to go, well, how do I know who changed what at what time? And you know, so part of this is you're going to look at this landscape and go, what is ready? If I was just an independent person going to run this in production myself and manage it myself in production, what's ready here, and then what vendors am I going to work with to make sure I have like the full story if I'm trying to run a business around this technology and build a business on top of this technology.
Well, I remember at I think it was DockerCon 2016, which if any of you were there, it was, I want to say it was like a week before the 2016 election.
No,
and
during the election.
It was like during the election, yeah. And I think I was talking to, I want to say it was USA Today, and if someone from USA Today says I'm full of crap, then it must have been somebody else. But they were like, oh, we super love Kubernetes. Like we just went in production today, and I was like, today you went into production with Kubernetes, like the day before the election, for like what is the biggest day for a newspaper of the whole year? You chose today to do it, and they're like, yeah, we're all in, we're making it happen, woo! And they were just like off to the races, and of course it went swimmingly, and they didn't have any issues with it as far as I know. So I don't, that may or may not be your risk profile. That was 2016, like that was right. You know, that wasn't 2020.
Also not have been, you know, and this is something, and just to, and it sounds like an old man, as I've already done a few times already, but you know, there are different grades of production, and there are different environments in an organization, and so it may well have been that they were running a cat picture competition, and that was the production environment that was running on Kubernetes, and not the election coverage. I don't know, but you know, you've got the different things. There's a nice comment here from Matt there. But you know, you do have the different environments that are in there, and there's, if you're going to start doing this stuff, then you're going to do it in environments that are able to cope with an outage, or cope with that, as you not just put in the new technology, but as we've alluded to, you need to learn about it. And the business needs to accept the changing things that are there.
Yeah.
And all of that's a lot of moving parts.
Well, with that, Ashley, you got the last word, because we are at the end of our hour. Thank you, everybody, again for joining. Really appreciate having you with us today, and hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share and tweet it out. We will post the video soon. And then tomorrow, we're having another panel with a whole different group of people. So it'll be interesting to see what changes as we get to kind of the last day, as we have a chance to finally watch the day 2 keynote. And we'll pick up the discussion from there. So thanks again, and really appreciate you coming out, and really appreciate all the chat and the commentary and all the support. Take care.
See everybody.
Everybody, it's Jay Gordon. Just want to let you know AzureFunBytes is going to be doing our first AzureFunBytes combos. And this week, we'll be doing a combo with Datadog. Ryan from Datadog will join me this Thursday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're going to talk about Azure Kubernetes Service, and we'll talk about Datadog and how they'll work together for those fundamental needs of monitoring on Azure. So we'll see you on Thursday. Bye-bye.